Hello and welcome to this short discussion, which is centred upon Network Rail's impending introduction of a new drug and alcohol standard. In fact, the drug and alcohol standard was published last September, but the compliance date is the 4th of March of this year. I'm delighted to be joined in discussion by Dr Steve Malleson, who is our Chief Medical Officer.
Hi.
Mike Stallard, one of our non-executive directors and also an expert in the design and running of drug and alcohol testing programs.
Hi.
And finally by Dr Simon Davis, who's a senior research scientist and expert in drug analytical science. First of all, Mike, might I start by asking you what you see as the main changes that are going to come into play with the new standard, particularly in relation to contracting companies working on the Network Rail infrastructure?
Well, there are three major changes that contractors really need to be aware of that are in the new standard. The first one concerns the drug testing profile. There are two new drugs that have been added to the existing panel. One is ketamine and the other is tramadol. I don't intend to go in any details into those two substances because I think we've got Simon here, and he certainly will be able to clarify the impact those two drugs have on individuals. The second one is a major issue with contractors. It's over the collection or the carrying out of random or unannounced testing. The existing test is a minimum of 5% of staff, safety critical staff that is, and that's going to be increased to quite a huge level of 20%. So under the new standard, 20% or a minimum of 20% of safety critical staff will be tested. Now there's a bit of a clarification in terms of Network Rail, and instead of ad-libbing, I'm going to read out what it actually says in the new standard. It says that no less than 20% of a random sample of the workforce engaged in safety critical work will require PTS certification or work that is designed as a key safety post. So that clarifies what they mean by safety critical, and certainly the PTS certification is a good clarification. The third one, which is again, an interesting change to their standard, is that in addition to the back to lab drug testing, you can now use a point of care, point of contact kit, known generally as POCs, and employers will be allowed to use those if they deem so. So they're the three major changes that have occurred in the new standard.
Oh, thanks very much. Dr. Davis, Mike mentioned the fact that two new drugs have been added to the panel, i.e. tramadol and ketamine. You couldn't just take us very quickly through the panel and put some sort of context around that in relation to the new drug and alcohol standard?
Sure, yeah. One thing I should just say at the outset is that the process of looking at the drugs on that panel has changed slightly, in that Network Rail are now having an annual review to look at the drugs which are on they are testing for, to basically keep abreast with any new trends within society. So I think it's probably very important for anybody listening to this to be sure they've got to keep on top of this. They can't just put their testing program together and just forget about it. This is something you're going to have to keep an eye on. The current testing panel, the drugs which they look for, includes all of the basic stuff: the amphetamines, the benzodiazepines, cannabis, cocaine, MDMA, of course, which is ecstasy, methadone, and of course the opiates. Now, what has been added is a strong painkiller called tramadol. This isn't quite as abundant as some of the other drugs, but the other compound, ketamine, is definitely climbing up the table of usage. And although it's not always purchased as a recreational drug in itself, it's often used by the drug suppliers to cut other compounds such as cocaine. So a lot of people might get quite surprised when they used cocaine, which has a relatively short testing date, and they think maybe they can get around some of the tests because of the short testing date, when they turn it with a ketamine positive rather than a cocaine positive. And of course, this is because it's been cut, and we can still pick up the ketamine after the cocaine has been metabolized. So that's basically where we are with the network rail testing panel. So like I say, it's important that everybody keeps an eye on it, keeps abreast with this, which was a dynamic testing table, not a static one.
Okay, thank you for that, Simon. Switching back to you, Mike, I mean, clearly the requirement to test a minimum of 20% of safety critical staff on a random unannounced basis could be quite challenging for some contractors, or indeed all contractors. Do you have any tips about how they might ensure that they put processes in place to make sure they are compliant? And secondly, are there any particular training issues that are thrown into the fray as a consequence of this new standard?
Well, as far as the testing is concerned, I'd say it's quite a huge increase in testing, and there is an expectation from Network Rail that contractors will have in place a robust plan in how to carry these out. They're not looking for a mad rush for the finishing post at the end of the year to demonstrate that they've done their minimum of 20%. And certainly when risk auditors are looking at themselves, they will be looking to see that there is a assertive method of planning by the particular company. Now, as far as tips are concerned, really that is the case, that to look at how you're going to plan out for the course of the year. Take time initially, but plan out how and when you're going to do these unannounced testing. So that's the most important thing, to make sure that your plan is seen as a robust document and that you are actually in control of how you're testing.
Thank you for that, Mike. Knowing that the new standard is going to go live soon, we did recently hold a webinar about point of care kits. Dr. Simon, you couldn't just give us a very quick run through regarding the science behind these kits, please?
Sure, yes. I think people might be more familiar than they think on these devices already, because we've been using them right through the pandemic. So the immunoassay, as it's known, the use of antibodies and antigens to detect COVID, we're all painfully familiar with that. And the very similar process is used for drugs of detection. And in essence, a sample is taken, it's placed onto a swab in the same way as you would do for or your urine, an oral sample would put on a swab, or a urine sample would be put into a pot, and that would then interact with the antibodies, which would then go up a wick. And if the drug is present, in the case of drugs, line is shown. And if there is a drug present, the antibody will have a dye attached to it, and that will then settle on the identification point, and a blue line or a red line will appear showing that it's a negative result. So there's a lot more complexity to that science, but I think, as you say, we have another POC seminar which you can look at if you want to go into that sort of detail.
Thank you very much. One of the things that contractors might be concerned about, of course, is the accuracy of these point of care kits. Whilst people are used to the idea that sending samples to the laboratory, you're going to be guaranteed an extremely accurate result, how comparable are the accuracies of these point of care kits?
Well, they've improved massively over the last 10 years, and 10, 15 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been advisable to use these devices in a legally defensible manner, as it were. Now, the laboratory testing will always be the gold standard. They use mass spectrometers, which are as near 100% accurate as you possibly can be, but they also use an immunoassay screening at the front end in the laboratory before they carry out the mass spectrometry testing. So it's really the immunoassay screening in the laboratory which is the true accuracy of the actual test itself. So in field, where you're actually collecting the sample, these devices now have accuracies of upwards of 99%. So there's two measures of the accuracy. There's the specificity and the sensitivity. So the sensitivity is the ability to identify true positive. The specificity is the ability to identify true negative. And both of those are 99% or above for a good, properly certified and properly tested POC device. So it's important that you do have a properly certified device that you use for your screening process. There are some less accurate devices out there, of course, but it's not too difficult to spot the differences.
Okay, so that's very reassuring. The POCs also, I think, do offer the opportunity for some cost savings. But aside from commerciality, Dr. Malleson, can you comment on any other particular advantages of switching to a programme which is based upon POCs as opposed to being based primarily on back to laboratory testing?
Yes, Dan, as occupational physician, we're obviously interested in both the validity of any test you're doing and the full process. Now, Simon's reassured us that the predictive value is now almost comparable with the screening test they'll get at first stage in the laboratory anyway. So in that point of view, we can be totally reassured that it's a perfectly viable test to use in this drug testing situation. And the other one is the actual process and how it impacts on your workforce. And I think having such a rapid, well, the ease of doing the test and then the rapid response has two areas where it's very good for individuals who might have to be subjected to a for-cause test, get an immediate knowledge, hopefully, of a negative result, and then they can put the whole episode from the drug and alcohol point of view to rest on the POCs testing. And also, when doing unannounced testing, in the past, all tests would go back to the laboratory for the full process, and there'd be some days possibly before might have the positive result will come back, and the individual will then be taken off safety critical working while the full assessment's done. But now a non-negative would be good enough grounds to remove someone in those cases from a safety critical activities. So I think it has serious good benefits from the actual process as far as the workforce is concerned. And of course, I think, as you've already explained, the general productivity and the effect on operations can only be beneficial. So I don't think that's really the points from the occupational health aspect I can see, Dan.
Okay, thank you very much. Finally, Mike, might I just ask you an administrative aspect of matters? As you know, the Network Rail drug and alcohol results are uploaded to a database called Sentinel. Are there going to be any significant changes in the way that system operates from the perspective of contractors if they are using point of care kits?
No, Dan, as far as I understand, the process will remain the same, and the collectors of using the POC will upload the information directly onto Sentinel, just exactly the way it's done at the moment with back to lab testing.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Thanks to everyone for watching this short discussion. Clearly, you may have questions as the date of the 4th of March approaches. Here at Express Medicals PLC, we are well versed in occupational drug and alcohol testing, albeit in relation to back to lab testing or indeed point of care testing. We will be delighted to hear from you and we will help you if we can. Very best wishes. Goodbye.